Ava Carter learned how to be quiet before she learned how to be happy. She grew up in a small, aging neighborhood outside Dayton, Ohio, where the houses leaned slightly to one side, as if even the walls were tired. Her childhood home was one of them, pale blue paint peeling like old scars, windows that rattled in the winter, and a front door that never quite closed right. Her father left when she was 7, not in a dramatic way. No screaming, no final hug, just the sound of footsteps walking away and a door shutting behind him. Ava remembers sitting on the living room carpet, surrounded by her crayons, waiting for him to come back. She waited until the sun disappeared, until her mother's eyes turned red, until the air felt heavier than it should. That was the first time Ava learned that some people leave without explanation and that the ones left behind are expected to keep going. Her mother, Linda, changed after that, not because she wanted to, but because life demanded it. She picked up extra shifts at a diner on Route 35, working mornings, nights, weekends. She came home smelling like coffee, grease, and exhaustion. Some nights she was too tired to eat. Other nights she cried quietly at the kitchen table, thinking Ava was asleep. Ava pretended she didn't hear. By age 9, Ava knew how to make box macaroni, set alarms, fold laundry, and lie when teachers asked how things were at home. Fine, she always said. Fine became her favorite word. At school, Ava was invisible, and when she wasn't, she was a target. Kids noticed her worn sneakers, her quiet voice, the way she flinched when someone raised theirs. They teased her for being weird, poor, too sensitive. Some days they hid her backpack. Other days they laughed when she cried. Teachers told her to ignore it, to be the bigger person, to toughen up. So she did. She learned how to swallow her pain whole and smile anyway. She learned how to disappear in plain sight. She learned that being easy meant being unnoticed. And being unnoticed felt safer than being hurt. At night, Ava lay awake listening to the sounds of the house. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, her mother's footsteps when she came home late. Ava learned to read those sounds like warnings, knowing when to stay quiet, when to ask nothing, when to pretend she was already asleep. She promised herself to things. She would never need anyone. She would never be weak. By the time she was a teenager, Ava wore strength like armor. She got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and never asked for help. Teachers praised her independence. Friends admired her maturity. No one asked how lonely she was. Inside, she carried a constant ache of feeling that she was always one mistake away from being abandoned again. That if she took up too much space, asked for too much love, or showed too much need, people would leave just like her father did. When she turned 18, Ava believed she had survived the worst life could offer. She was wrong, because surviving childhood doesn't prepare you for the ways adulthood can hurt, especially when you don't know your worth yet. Ava met Ethan Miller when she was 19, on a warm September afternoon that smelled like fallen leaves and possibility. He was standing in line at a coffee shop near the community college, joking with the barista, laughing easily, the kind of man who made space feel lighter just by being in it. When he turned and smiled at her, Ava felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Not fear, not tension, warmth. They started talking about nothing: classes, weather, music, and somehow it felt like everything. Ethan listened when she spoke, really listened. He didn't interrupt or look distracted. When she mentioned her childhood, he didn't brush it off. He frowned softly and said, "That must have been really hard." No one had ever said that to her before. That night, Ava replayed the conversation over and over, her heart racing with something dangerously close to hope. She told herself not to get attached. She told herself she didn't need anyone. But when Ethan texted her the next morning, "I had a really nice time talking to you," her walls cracked just enough to let him in. Ethan made Ava feel chosen. He held her hand in public. He introduced her to his friends. He told her she was different from other girls, quieter, deeper, more real. To someone who grew up feeling invisible, those words were intoxicating. Ava didn't realize how quickly she began tying her worth to his approval. At first, the changes were subtle. Ethan didn't like some of her friends, said they were bad influences. He didn't like when she stayed late at school, asked why she didn't want to come home to him instead. He didn't like when she wore certain clothes, said men stared too much. When Ava pushed back, he laughed and said, "I just care about you." And because no one had ever cared loudly for her before, she believed him. Slowly, her world became smaller. She stopped seeing friends. stopped sharing opinions, stopped correcting him when he misunderstood her. Every compromise felt small on its own, but together, they began to erase her. Ethan's affection came with conditions. When Ava pleased him, he was warm, loving, attentive. When she disappointed him, he grew cold, distant, critical, silent. That silence terrified her. It reminded her too much of her father leaving, of unanswered questions, of love disappearing without warning. So she tried harder. She apologized even when she didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She blamed herself when he withdrew. "You're too sensitive," he said when she cried. "You overthink everything," he said when she asked questions. "I don't know why you make things so complicated," he said when she needed reassurance. And Ava believed him, because deep down, she had always believed she was difficult to love. The first real crack came 2 years into the relationship. Ava borrowed Ethan's phone to look up directions when hers died. A message popped up, a woman's name she didn't recognize. The text was innocent enough on the surface, but something about it felt wrong, familiar, intimate. When Ava asked Ethan about it, he snapped. "You don't trust me?" he said sharply. "Why are you going through my phone?" God, this is why relationships fail. He turned it around so smoothly that Ava ended up apologizing for being insecure, for being damaged, for bringing her past into the present. The messages didn't stop. Late nights, changed passwords, excuses that didn't line up. Ava felt the truth hovering just out of reach, heavy and unavoidable. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating. She lived in a constant state of anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then one night, it did. Ethan came home drunk, careless, his guard down. His phone buzzed on the table while he showered. Ava stared at it for a long time, heart pounding, hands shaking. She told herself not to look, but survival had taught her something important. Ignoring the truth never made it kinder. She opened the messages. Months of lies stared back at her. Another woman, intimate words, plans, laughing emojis where Ava's tears should have mattered. Ava sat there in silence as the truth settled into her bones. When Ethan came out, towel around his waist, she handed him the phone. He didn't deny it. Instead, he sighed, annoyed. "It didn't mean anything," he said. "You weren't there for me. You've been so distant lately." Ava felt something inside her finally break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, irreversible snap. She realized then that she had been fighting for someone who was never fighting for her. That she had spent years shrinking herself to be lovable, and it still hadn't been enough. She packed a suitcase that night. Ethan watched from the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. No apology, no desperation, no attempt to stop her. And somehow, that hurt the most. Ava drove away in silence, tears blurring the road ahead. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay. But even as she left, guilt followed her. Doubt whispered that she was overreacting, that maybe she deserved it, that maybe this was all she could expect from love. She didn't know it yet, but leaving Ethan wasn't the end of her pain. It was the beginning of facing everything she had been running from. Ava thought leaving Ethan would be the hardest thing she'd ever do. But life, as it often does, proved her wrong. A month after moving into her small apartment downtown, the phone rang late at night. Her mother's trembling voice barely whispered her name. "Mom?" Ava said, trying to keep calm. I fell," Linda whispered, pausing to catch her breath. I can't get up." The words landed like bricks on Ava's chest. She dropped everything, raced through the darkened streets, and found her mother on the kitchen floor, pale, shaking, her glasses cracked beside her. The paramedics arrived quickly, but the diagnosis made Ava's stomach sink, a mild stroke, caused by years of stress, exhaustion, and untreated high blood pressure. Ava became her mother's shadow. She cooked meals, cleaned the apartment, helped her to the bathroom, reminded her to take her medications. She slept in a chair next to her mother's bed some nights, too anxious to go home, too exhausted to think about herself. Her body ached, her heart ached, and the fear that she would lose the one person who had carried her in small ways all these years consumed her. At the same time, bills continued to pile up. Ethan's betrayal had left her drained emotionally, and now financial pressure clawed at her every thought. She worked 2 jobs, long shifts at a retail store during the day, cleaning offices at night, surviving on a few hours of restless sleep. Her friends called, but she stopped returning messages. She felt she had no time for connection. Every day was a cycle of exhaustion, anxiety, and quiet desperation. Panic attacks came uninvited. One morning, she woke sweating and shaking, heart hammering in her chest, unable to catch a full breath. She felt trapped inside her own body, like it belonged to someone else. The terror was invisible, yet it ruled her. She felt herself shrinking again, the little girl in Dayton who learned to be silent because that was the only way to survive. She cried in bathroom stalls at work. She cried in her car before heading into the office. She cried late at night when no one could hear. She began to realize something terrifying. She had been living her entire life for everyone but herself. She carried the weight of her father leaving, the weight of her mother's struggles, the weight of Ethan's betrayal, and now, the weight of her own survival. It was too much. Her body ached, her mind was fraying, and the future felt impossible. One particularly sleepless night, Ava sat on her balcony, watching the city lights blur through her tears. For the first time in years, she let herself scream into the quiet. She screamed for the little girl who had been abandoned. She screamed for the woman who had been betrayed. She screamed for the daughter who had carried everyone else's pain as her own. And then, for the first time, she allowed herself a single thought: I cannot do this alone. It was terrifying to admit. She had spent her entire life believing that strength meant enduring everything without complaint. But real strength, she realized now, was letting someone else hold a part of the weight. Real courage was saying, I am not okay, and I need help. The next day, she made a call she had avoided for months to a therapist recommended by a friend she hadn't spoken to in ages. Her voice shook, but she said the words anyway. I think I need help. The therapist didn't judge. She didn't lecture. She listened gently, like a warm hand guiding Ava through a storm she had navigated alone for too long. Sessions became weekly lifelines. Ava began unpacking years of trauma, abuse, guilt, and grief. She began recognizing patterns she hadn't seen before: the way she prioritized everyone else, the way she equated love with sacrifice, the way she kept quiet because speaking up always seemed dangerous. At work, she started small. She left early when she needed to rest. She said no to tasks she couldn't handle. She didn't apologize for needing her own space. It was awkward, uncomfortable, frightening, but each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Her mother's recovery was slow. Some days were easier than others. Ava learned patience, empathy, and the devastating lesson of life's fragility. She realized that the years of neglect and sacrifice had left scars on her mother too. And as she helped Linda regain her independence, Ava recognized a reflection of herself in those efforts: someone capable, someone resilient, but someone finally willing to acknowledge her own limits. Ava also began talking to her old friends again cautiously. She told them fragments of her story. Some listened, some didn't understand. But she discovered that even partial connection was healing. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a woman who had survived betrayals, abandonment, and the crushing weight of responsibility, and now she had permission to exist for herself, even for a few minutes a day. By the time she sat on that balcony months later, she noticed something new. She was breathing differently. The tension in her shoulders had eased just slightly. She still carried scars, some deep, some hidden, but they no longer defined her. She had faced the depth of life's cruelty, and despite breaking along the way, she was still standing. And in that realization, she found a fragile, flickering ember of hope. Hope that she could rebuild. Hope that she could forgive herself for surviving while others failed her. Hope that she could one day find love and life without fear of annihilation. Ava sat on the edge of her bed, sunlight spilling through the blinds, and took a long, deep breath. She had not known how to breathe like this in years, fully, without fear or guilt. The mornings had once been her enemy, a reminder that she had to go back into a world that demanded too much. But now, mornings felt like invitations. Invitations to live, to exist, to reclaim pieces of herself she had lost along the way. Therapy had taught her that silence wasn't strength, it was survival. That caring for herself wasn't selfish, it was essential. That boundaries weren't walls meant to keep people out. They were signs saying, I matter too. She began small, almost imperceptibly. She went to the grocery store without rushing. She cooked meals she actually wanted to eat. She walked her neighborhood in the evenings, listening to the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the quiet whispers of a world moving forward. Even when she had felt stuck for so long, the first time she said no to a task at work without guilt, she felt a flicker of power. It was subtle, almost shocking. She had spent decades bending for everyone else, apologizing for needing anything, for taking any space, for being human. Now, she simply said, "I can't," and accepted it. And the world didn't end. Ava's mother, Linda, slowly regained strength. There were still days when she faltered, needing Ava's help, but the dynamic had shifted. Ava no longer felt trapped in the role of caretaker at the expense of her own life. Instead, she shared responsibilities with friends, neighbors, and professionals. She learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Friendships returned cautiously. Ava reached out to old friends she had distanced herself from during her relationship with Ethan. Some connections didn't survive, some thrived, but each conversation reminded her of a truth she had buried deep in childhood. She was worthy of love, care, and presence. Not conditional, not transactional, just worthy. Ava began journaling again, something she had abandoned as a teenager. She wrote letters to her younger self, letters she would never send. "You are not broken. You are never the problem. The pain you carry is not shameful. It is proof that you survived." Writing became therapy in its purest form. She didn't censor. She didn't edit. She allowed herself to cry on the page, to rage, to laugh, to finally breathe through the words. Slowly, Ava rebuilt her sense of self. She returned to passions she had abandoned. She painted in the evenings, filling her small apartment with colors she had once loved. She enrolled in courses she had dreamed of taking but never pursued. Each accomplishment, each small act of care for herself, chipped away at the years of neglect, abuse, and self-blame. Romantic love was no longer a goal. She realized that she had spent so much of her life seeking validation from others that she had forgotten validation could come from within. The thought of dating again was terrifying, yes, but also liberating. She no longer needed someone to complete her. She was complete enough on her own. The healing was not linear. Some days she still woke up with knots in her stomach, shadows of Ethan's betrayal creeping into her chest. Some nights she cried, remembering her childhood loneliness, the words left unsaid, the years she had carried everyone else's burdens. But the difference now was profound. She cried with awareness. She cried because she was human, not because she was broken. One evening, Ava stood on her balcony and looked at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like distant stars, each one a story, a life, a moment moving forward. She realized that life had given her challenges too harsh for anyone to bear, but she had borne them. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but she had borne them. And she was still standing. Ava thought about the little girl in Dayton who had learned to stay silent, to shrink, to survive. She whispered into the night, "You made it. You survived. You are stronger than you know." In that quiet, Ava felt a release she hadn't known existed. She allowed herself to hope for joy, for love, for peace, for a future she could finally embrace. She made choices from that place of self-worth. She spoke her mind at work. She declined events she didn't want to attend. She laughed freely with friends. She forgave herself for past mistakes. She grieved what she had lost without letting grief define her. Her mother once told her, "Ava, you've always been strong, but strength doesn't mean you carry everything alone. True strength is knowing when to let go." Ava had finally understood that. And now, she lived in that space of power, vulnerability, and self-acceptance. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't fully healed. She wasn't invulnerable, but she was alive, fully, completely, unapologetically alive.